And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to the Archies, the new award show hosted by yours truly, Noah Freeman, along with Matt Luthkins and Nithin Christian on the Hoosier Sound's 140th episode as the official podcast of Indiana HQ. This year's award show is taking place on Tuesday evening, May 5th, 2020. What are the Archies, you may ask? Well, it's the newest award show for IU basketball, and we're giving out awards to the program during the decade of the 2010s. I'm going to hand the mic over to one of our other hosts, Matt Lukens, for their opening statement as we get this award show underway.
Yeah, so welcome to the Archies, everybody. I just want to let you know how proud I am to be a Hoosier fan at the end of the decade, when at the beginning of the decade, I think I was still in middle school. So if that makes any of you feel old, I'm sorry. But no, there's been a lot that has gone on for the Hoosier program. Of course, we're going to talk about the 2012 team a bit and Yogi Ferrell, and we'll talk about Victor Oladipo, and we'll talk about Trendon Watford, and we'll talk about Robert Johnson and Archie Miller and a whole bunch. But I just want to say, the program is in a much better place than when we found it in 2010, and I think we're all grateful for that. So, Nithin, what are your opening thoughts for the Archies?
It's funny. We were just talking before we started recording here. Matt said Trendon Watford there. He meant Christian
Again. No.
He said he got it out of the way before the podcast, but apparently he didn't get it out.
There will be zero Trendon Watford discussion on here. Only Christian.
I apologize.
Only Christian. No, this is super fun. Obviously, the name hopefully grabbed all of your attention. Hopefully we can keep it called the Archies for decades and decades more. I mean, that's the plan here with Fred Glass's hire, and now Scott Dolson, who's the new AD. Hopefully he doesn't have to make too many or any basketball coaching changes coming up. But this is going to be exciting. I'll say one thing before we get started. Whenever you look at a basketball program like Indiana over the course of 10 years, there are a lot of really good players and really good performances that just miss the cut. You only have one award to give out. And, when you look back at the decade, there are some 30-point performances and truly sort of program boosting wins, for example, that just aren't even in the discussion because we're looking at things over a 10-year span. So this is going to be really fun. I can't wait to hear what we all have to say for this awards show and see what the Academy came up with. I don't know if there's an Academy that exists.
We are the Academy.
Yeah. All right. So the three of us are the hosts for this year's Archies, and we are going to be the host and the analysts for all of these awards. And I will preface all of these awards that I think there are 2 or 3, if not a dozen, different answers for a lot of these different awards that I know that, and feel free to comment if you very even loudly disagree with any of our award choices. But there are definitely going to be a lot of different people / teams / coaches that could win these awards. And this is just our thoughts. So our first award is going to be the best player of the 2010s. And right before I get to that, I think Nithin and I were talking about this before. I think we actually are pretty qualified to talk about the 2010s because we were going through the amount of years that the three of us were physically at Indiana, physically at all of the games, not even sitting home on the couch watching the games. And all three of us have been there every single year. Nithin, the first 4 years was there, and then I was there by myself for one before overlapping with Matt for a few. Then Matt was there by himself, and then Nithin was back at IU this past year. So the last 10 years, one of the three of us has been at every single at least home game, if not more tournaments and away games. So I think that makes us actually pretty qualified to talk about the 2010 decades.
Yeah, not even, you're right. Like not just on campus and watching it at a bar or on TV. We're talking physically at each and every Assembly Hall basketball game. And then, like you said, a number of road and neutral site games too. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what we're going to be doing for the 2020s, but that's a problem for 10 years down the line.
We're all going to be sitting on the couch. But all right, best player, and I think this was probably the hardest one to talk about. I know there was a lot of, we were talking in our Slack group with Indiana HQ, and there are a lot of different answers, and it just happened that the three of us picked the same player, and we're all even going to give our analysis because it was really, really hard to even go over a couple other people, but the consensus Archie's Best Player Award for the 2010s decade goes to Yogi Ferrell. Yay. Yogi Ferrell was everyone clap at home. You've got Yogi Ferrell, a guy that stayed all 4 years at Indiana. He still brought the team to a Big Ten title. Made it to the Sweet 16, made it to the NCAA tournament a couple times, was a guy that was key in transitioning from the Victor Oladipo, Cody Zeller, Christian Watford era into the final years of Tom Crean. He obviously the fifth most all-time leading scorer on Indiana University and the assist leader for the Hoosiers. A guy that I think just barely, for all of us, barely edged out Victor Oladipo, because it's kind of hard to definitely not mention Victor Oladipo when you're talking about the best player in the 2010s. So, Matt, I know you were thinking about Yogi too. Why did Yogi edge out your pick over maybe someone like Victor Oladipo or Cody Zeller?
Well, I think Cody Zeller, Yogi, Victor, and then Jawan I also want to put in that category because Jawan was great himself. As a Hoosier. But for me, Yogi had 2 great years, 2 special years, in fact, 2 Sweet 16 runs. Some might argue that the 2012-2013 team probably should have won the national title that year. So that together, he had 2 of the most successful seasons that IU's had in the last 20 years on his resume. He didn't have the Kentucky win, right? Like that wasn't the thing he had on his resume, but that's fine. We'll forgive him for coming a year later and making that next year special. And then also something we'll talk about later. He also owns the assist record at IU. So it's something that he beat. And, somebody who was in discussion recently in the media in Isaiah Thomas broke his record. And I believe it's somebody else's record before Isaiah Thomas, but in the story tradition of point guards at IU, the story tradition of guards at IU, Yogi Ferrell is the all-time assists leader, and that is something to be celebrated. And that's why his career was so special at IU.
Especially when it's kind of hard to come by a point guard, at least the last 10 years for Indiana. It's been almost the only guy that you almost in 50 years. The 2010s, the only point guard you're ever going to remember is Yogi Ferrell. You're not going to remember almost anyone else when it's all said and done. So
you're not going to remember Josh Newkirk.
So Nithin, why did Yogi also edge it out for you?
Yeah, right. So I feel like we need a Yogi, either the real Yogi or an imitator to give a speech here. Thanking his parents for all they've done
family
for him.
Speeches and
well, look. Oh, first of all, I think it was Michael Lewis, the point guard whose record he broke. And I think that's right off the top of my head. But look, with Yogi, I mean, he scored 1,986 points in his career at IU, and he was really the guy for 3 seasons. I mean, after his freshman year where Indiana made it to the Sweet 16, it was the Yogi Ferrell show. And he averaged over 16 points a game, but he also shot 40% plus from 3 each of his last 3 seasons, which is nothing to scoff at, obviously. I think people would pay a pretty penny right now, metaphorically, to have a 40% 3-point shooter on this version of Indiana's basketball team. So Yogi's the winner here. And yeah, like you guys said, Oladipo, Zeller, they were extremely memorable during their time at Indiana, but when you don't play all 4 seasons, you're immediately at a disadvantage. And there are other guys, Juwan Morgan, that you could maybe stretch it to a guy like Robert Johnson too, who put up numbers in a bunch of different categories. But after thinking about it, it's Yogi. He scored, he distributed the basketball, he was always accountable for his poor performances, and of course, he was the headline grabber for all of his great ones. So it's Yogi.
You're right, by the way. It is Michael Lewis.
Yeah.
That's the record he broke.
There you go.
Good job.
Yeah, and those are some of the reasons why we thought even when you got Victor Oladipo winning Player of the Year and all the extra accolades that he had. Also, remember we're going off of their Hoosier careers, because if you add the NBA careers, then obviously it becomes a much different story. So just their time on the campus. And again, I definitely wouldn't fault you if it was someone like Vic or Cody or even someone like Juwan all the way down. All right, to introduce actually the next couple awards, Nithin, give us who the Archies 2010s Decade Best Team.
Ooh. Oh man, so definitely, if you ask me, this comes down to two teams, right? The two teams that won the Big Ten, right? There's the team in 2012-13, and then the one in 2015-16. When it's all said and done, though, there was just one group of Hoosiers that was a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament in the last 10 years. And that's going to be the 2012-13 squad. Okay. And I know it didn't end as well as Hoosier fans would have liked. But that team was not only a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, but that season they were the top ranked team for the most number of weeks. They had some big wins. We remember that amazing atmosphere at Assembly Hall for the win over Michigan. College game day was in Bloomington. And then IU not only defeated the Wolverines at home, they then went into Ann Arbor and clinched the Big Ten outright title in Michigan. So really great basketball team. Obviously, 29-7 kind of stings. They slowed down at the end, but when you compare that team to all the others at IU, they're the best team of the decade without question, if you ask me.
For sure. And again, like all those comparisons you were talking about with the 2015-16 team, and I don't even think there's much of an argument for any other team, just because a majority of those other teams hovered around 500 for their specific record. The only guys you can actually mention was this past season, and I don't think this past season would have rivaled either of those two teams, and then the 2011-2012 season. So you could also talk about the 14-15 season, but they didn't get too far in the NCAA tournament itself. So yeah, the 2012-2013 team that should have gone farther, I think definitely is going to win the best team for the 2010s decade. All right, kicking it back over to Nithin for the Archies 2010s decade best individual performance.
Right. So this isn't best Indiana career total. Okay, this is, hey, which guy, this one game, one moment, if you even want to drill it down that much. Look, best individual performance. There were some surprising ones that I didn't remember. Right, like when I looked at this, Robert Johnson had a huge game at Iowa a couple years ago. There were some big games from Oladipo and Zeller that I had forgotten about. Juwan Morgan scored 35 against Butler in the Crossroad Classics a couple of years ago. But honestly, I totally forgot about that. I only remembered Rob Finney hitting the buzzer beater at the end. So when it's all said and done, I think our winner for best individual performance is still Juwan Morgan. The previous year, when he put up 34 points, he grabbed 11 boards and scored a big basket off an offensive rebound. I believe Zach McRoberts got the offensive rebound, and then Morgan got either a layup or a dunk inside, and helped Indiana to really the first big win for Archie Miller at his time at IU. So the best individual performance for us, the award goes to Juwan Morgan back in 2017 when he put up 34 and 11 against the Fighting Irish.
Yeah, and something Hoosier fans might not remember about the game. I think we remember the go-ahead dunk by Juwan off the offensive rebound by Zach McRoberts. I think it was off a missed free throw, by the way, if I'm remembering correctly. What you might not remember is that we hit, I think it was Robert Johnson hit a half-court shot at halftime to put us up like 37-20 something. We had like a good 10-point lead at halftime going into the second half, and then we blew it. And we were down 8 with like a minute and a half or 2 minutes left against Notre Dame. And we scored the last 8 points of the game, last 8 points of regulation to tie it at 65-65 to force overtime. And then in overtime, we were down, and then we had to shoot free throws. You know how terrible our free throw shooting had been all year. And Juwan goes up to the line, sinks the first one. We're like, all right, you got to sink the second one to tie it. Misses the second one. We're like, oh no, Zach McRoberts with the clutch rebound, passes it like what's it called in football? It's like a not shuffle pass.
Shovel pass, right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
shovel pass. I was like shuffleboard, but shovel pass. Yes.
Shuffle pass.
I couldn't get it out of my head.
You got to do the shuffle and then you pass it.
Yeah,
That's the only way to complete it.
Yeah.
So the shovel pass is like shovel passes to Juwan, who slams it home, puts us ahead, and then we play some good defense right at the end to make sure they don't get a half court shot off. And there you go. We won. So, I mean, look, he did everything that game. I believe he was 11 of 14 from the field, 34 points. I mean, Juwan was always known for being a high percentage scorer and not taking a bunch of shots, but making with the shots that he took. And that was just the best game that he had in IU uniform. And that's even over his triple-double performance, the 10-10-10 performance he had at one point.
Yeah, no, and the one thing I also remember from that game is he was guarding Bonzie Colson pretty much the entire afternoon. And Bonzie Colson was one of the best players in recent history for Notre Dame, and Juwan Morgan had to really play tough on both ends of the floor. But yeah, really fun game. And like you said, Morgan had a couple of other really eye-opening performances: the triple-double, 35 against Butler. But I think this one took the cake.
Exactly. So, like you guys said, Juwan kind of at the top of the list for a lot of individual performances. It's kind of interesting that, I mean, you could talk about Devontae Green's 30-point game. You could talk about Yogi Ferrell getting 38 against IPFW, but when you've got even just out of 5 of those performances and 3 of those are Juwan Morgan's, I think it's pretty easy to say Juwan Morgan definitely gets a Best Individual Performance award. All right, we're going to take a break from our Archie Awards, and we're going to kick it over to Nithin for Who Won the Week this past week in IU sports.
Yeah, really interesting news that came down really within the last hour before we started recording here on Tuesday night. Devontae Green, graduating senior, has announced on Twitter that, okay, he's throwing his name in the hat for the NBA draft. That's not surprising. What kind of is, he's joining Jay-Z's agency, Rock Nation Sports, as far as entering the 2020 draft. So really, kind of a trendy move right now for a lot of younger players to join Rock Nation, basically. And Devontae Green has gone out and done that. So very curious to see how the entire NBA offseason goes. Obviously, the end of the season itself, no one really knows right now. But Devontae Green signing with Rock Nation, I would say he won the week.
Yeah, and especially who knows when there's going to be an NBA draft, to be honest. That could be something that is very, very far into the future. But congrats to him, especially signing and being able to start to pursue that. That's something that he's definitely said that has been his dream. So I hope he's able to do that, if at least not some stepping stones to accomplish that within his near future. All right, going on to our next award, the Best Team Performance. Matt is going to introduce for our 2010s decade.
Yes, and I think this goes without speaking or even thinking what this is, but I'll do a little bit of a rhyme to introduce you into it. So, where were you on the 10th of December, 2011, a come? Where were you on the 10th of December as the Hoosiers took on the Wildcats in Bloomington? I mean, where were you on the 10th of December when the Hoosier team lit our hearts aglow? Where were you on the 10th of December when Indiana beat number 1 Kentucky? Behold. So, beating number 1 Kentucky on the 10th of December, 10th of December, 2011. Wow, I was reading that so wrong in my brain. But yeah, look, knocking off number 1 Kentucky, Anthony Davis, Michael Gilchrist come into town, probably the best atmosphere Assembly Hall has had in 20 years. Yogi Ferrell wasn't there, but I think he was in attendance. I believe he was on a visit to the game. You had Victor Oladipo, Cody Zeller, Jordy Holes, and then obviously I said Trendon Watford before, but Christian Watford hits the game-winning shot to win the game. We all know the Watt shot. I mean, come on. But that has to be the best team performance. Am I wrong, guys?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely...
Any others come close?
No, nothing else comes close. I mean, it seems like one of the more underrated games is Indiana's round of 32 win over Kentucky. It happened in 2016. But still, as I started the show by saying, like, there are a lot of really fun, exciting, memorable games that missed out. And this one, there's no question. It's Indiana's win over Kentucky in December 2011. I was there behind the basket. It was an unbelievable atmosphere. I can totally second that. But, going into that game, I'm sure a lot of you remember who are listening. It was an incredibly hyped basketball game going into it. I mean, Indiana had been undefeated, and they were looking to, at a bare minimum, at least hold their own against Kentucky that night. Obviously, the number one ranked team in the country, and they had just beaten North Carolina, who had players like Harrison Barnes. Kentucky had just defeated them, and people were like, well, Kentucky's going to come into Bloomington and win. Well, didn't happen. By the way, yeah, Matt, that was a really beautiful poem. I mean, look, I don't know what you might have to pick that up on the side here during this COVID-19 shutdown.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I think there's always a market for poetry, especially basketball poetry, I think. But that win over Kentucky was just an incredible night. Before, the during, and the after was unforgettable. Christian Watford, watch shot left wing off a good pass by Verdell Jones, and it really did elevate Indiana to a whole nother level, if not 2 or 3 levels. After a really tough rebuild, when Indiana had some really nasty win-loss records over 3 years, knocked off Kentucky, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I have a funny story about the watch shot, by the way, and just like the impact it's had, like, on the program in general. So I was giving tours last year of Assembly Hall, which was fun and something I really recommend doing if you're in Bloomington, because you get like some fun stories about stuff in and around Assembly Hall that you might not have known before. But there's a school group I brought on, and these kids are like 10 years old, 11 years old, right? They were maybe 4 or 5 when the watch shot was actually like happened on TV. So they barely remember it, but they came up to me. We got on the court and like, Matt, where did the watch shot happen? So it was fun to like walk over to the left wing by the home bench and point out exactly the spot where Christian Watford catches the patch from Verdell Jones and then hits it. And that's just one of like the best things that ever happened to me at IU. So much fun. And look, kids like 10, 11 years old remember what happened. Like, it was a defining moment of the decade and one of the best upsets. People don't even know IU basketball, but they'll know the watch shot because of how important, how impactful it was on the sports landscape.
And just to wrap up, I think more of going to the best team performance, since that's the specific award. Yeah, Christian Watford was the more dominant player throughout most of the game, but you look at even just the box score going all the way back, and Christian had 20 points, but then for the most part, out of 6 other guys that contributed for most of it, it was 11 points for Zeller, 11 for Holes, 13 for Oladipo, 10 for Sheehy. Rebounds was pretty similar as well, only 7 at the most for Zeller and Oladipo. Everyone had about the same. You had assists go different, but that's kind of a stat that you can't really spread the love around much. But the starting 5 basically played most of the game, where you had Pritchard and Sheehy coming off the bench a little more, even though Pritchard didn't get very many meaningful minutes. But I definitely think that's a game that definitely wins the best team performance, not even just for the historical part, just for the way that they were able to win as one team. It wasn't just one person dominating the entire game. So, all right, let's go into the best supporting actor or actress. So, Nithin, who won the best supporting actor, aka the best supporting player for the 2010s decade?
Yeah, no, this is a fun one. Obviously we're kind of going with the Oscars type theme. After thinking about it, a couple guys that just missed out were Max Bielfeldt, came over from Michigan, solid player. Nick Zeisloft came over from Illinois State, solid player, great shooter. In fact, I think he's still in the G League, which is a testament to how valuable 3-point shooting is nowadays. But with all that said, our winner for best supporting actor is Will Sheehy, who for 3 seasons was the primary guy off the bench for Indiana. He played over 100 games his first 3 years, didn't even start 20 of them, started less than 20 of them. And really when he started, it was due to things like injuries and stuff like that. So Will Sheehy, Best Supporting Actor, even his senior year where he started, he clearly played a second fiddle type role to Yogi Ferrell, and it was Yogi's team that year. So Will Sheehy, who even won Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year, clearly our winner for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he won Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year, and I don't think we had another one that was even close. BFL was great. Loved Max. That team was a lot of fun to watch when I was a freshman in college. But he's got to win it. Also, he's my boy because he's from Stuart, Florida, and I'm from Stuart, Florida. And he's actually the reason why I even watched the IU Kentucky game in 2011, because my teacher was his basketball coach. It was like, you need to watch this because I know you like sports, and one of my former basketball players is playing tonight against number 1 Kentucky. And I went, okay, don't force me to watch basketball. I'll watch it myself. Thank you very much. But yes, I'll watch it. And then I ended up falling in love with IU, and then now I'm on a podcast talking about it. So thanks, Will Sheehy.
Yeah. So the one thing I also noticed, though, we were talking about Sheehy winning Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year. That award, there aren't many slouches that have won that award. We're talking guys like Draymond Green, who's obviously risen to prominence in the NBA. How about Duncan Robinson, who's now in the Heat? When Robinson was on Michigan, he was a lethal 3-point shooter, and that's his role in the NBA right now, playing big minutes for Miami. I think he was a D2 transfer also. So how about that, right? D2 transfer, Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year, and then now in the NBA. And then we talk about Max Bielfeldt. By the way, just to be clear, Bielfeldt did also win that award, but he didn't play as many years for IU, so he came just short there. And then how about a guy like Nigel Hayes from Wisconsin, who's a solid, if not even better than solid plus player during his time at Wisconsin. So that's a pretty prestigious award, and Sheehy winning it and playing that supporting role player type role over the course of 4 seasons is why he won it.
As we pause here, what do you guys think? Comment below, message us. What do you think? Is there anyone that we missed even talking about? Because there are definitely a lot of players to talk about even in the 2010s. But Nithin, Nick Zeisloft is currently on a Spanish team. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce some of these things. He's been bouncing because remember he was on the Fort Wayne Mad Ants, then he bounced around on a bunch of different teams in Europe, went back to the Santa Cruz Warriors, and now is in Spain playing this year currently. So he was just up until like the past month or so. All right, our next award, the Best Director Award, aka the Best Coach of the 2010s decade, goes to Tom Crean. And again, there are only obviously 2 head coaches that you can talk about in the 2010s, and I think our consensus was that there's not much Archie has been able to do just because he's only had 3 seasons at Indiana. And if you look at the 2010s just specifically, not even anything even leading up to it or after, you've got Tom Crean, a guy that made it to what was it, 1, 2, 3 Sweet 16s and made it to the tournament 4 times, won 2 Big Ten titles, and just Archie hasn't had enough time to physically do all that because he's only been there 3 years. And if you even put the stat that Tom Crean made it to the NCAA tournament 4 times, that's just the portion of longevity. You've also got Tom Crean, who's got a few people in the NBA itself, and again, Archie Miller doesn't have as many people even possibly to graduate to go into the NBA, where he's only got Romeo Langford up there at the moment that he specifically recruited and gone into the NBA. So that's not to say that Archie Miller is even worse than Tom Crean. I just think in the 2010s specifically, and who's to say Archie won't even possibly get better than him. But Matt, what say you of our 2010s Best Director going to Tom Crean?
Well, I mean, the jury's still out on Archie, obviously. I think this would have been his first tournament team this year. So it's hard to compete with somebody who had 2 Sweet 16s under his belt at IU. Though some might argue that he underperformed with that, and I would agree with that. However, it's still 2 Sweet 16s is pretty good. And
3.
Look, 3 Sweet 16, sorry, my bad, 3. And look, let's be honest, folks. when Tom Crean found himself and found this Indiana program, even in 2010, he had been there for a couple of years, right? When he found it, and then the way he left it, he left it in a better place than he found it. And there is something to say about that. Like, there's something that he turned this program around, whether the self-imposed sanctions were correct or not, whether they were a little bit harsh or not, that's up for debate, right? But he took in a program that was on its knees and helped it get to 3 Sweet 16s, had a fantastic, couple years with Victor Oladipo, developed a bunch of NBA players, and then left it in a better place than he found it. So I think he's got to win it.
And that's a really good point, Matt, because let's say in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, let's say that Archie Miller or the next coach does bring IU back to the Bob Knight era, or even half of what Bob Knight did. You're gonna look back and you're gonna see that Tom Crean was the guy that did transform the program back from the hole it was digging itself and dug itself into, and turning it around back to a program that at least can compete and start to get into tournaments. And then also, like Tom Crean specifically did, also like we saw a #1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Obviously couldn't get past the Sweet 16, but still made three Sweet 16 spots, and a guy that got the program back to at least tournament type of teams, and not to where they were in such a hole that it's going to take years and years to dig itself out of. Because again, Archie got a program that was very different than when Tom Crean did. So Archie hasn't had to do as much work to build it out of basically ash to try and get back to at least some semblance of any type of basketball.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with all that you guys said, but just to throw a couple of numbers out there for those of you listening, between 1994 and 2012, Indiana had just won 1 Big Ten title and made just 1 Sweet 16. Okay. So in that 18-year span, it's not like Indiana was going through glory days through the 90s and the early to mid part of the 2000s, nothing like that. Okay. And Tom Crean came in, got to the Sweet 16 3 times, won 2 Big Ten titles. For that reason, he's our best director for the 2010s decade.
Yep. All right, let's take a small break, and we'll give it over to Matt for our social media shout out of the week.
Sure. So social media shout out this week comes the way of men's soccer. That's the men's soccer team. There was a documentary that came out today, this afternoon, on Big Ten Network called Worth the Wait. And it's the story about the IU men's soccer team and their 8 overtime Big Ten victory. So I'll hand it over to our NCAA victory to Noah, who watched it, who can talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about too many details specifically, because I think you should really go watch it. Even if you're just a hardcore basketball fan and you don't even watch even something like football, I think it was something that was definitely worth the watch. I guarantee it's on a rerun, or if it's in the Big Ten/Fox app, they might not even if you cut down commercials, it's a little over an hour. It's definitely worth the watch, because it talks about, like Matt said, it's basically a documentary about Jerry Yeagley, the guy that basically founded IU men's soccer and got it to where it is, found it from nothing. It was nothing but a club until he took over, and they made it an official sport, and they got it to where Jerry Yeagley, won 6 NCAA titles, and then of course building that legacy to where the next 2 coaches won 1 each, and they have a total of 8 NCAA titles, where the men's soccer program is basically the most historic NCAA tournament, NCAA men's soccer program. And it specifically today was talking about that first victory, because Yeagley became the head coach in 1963, and then they didn't win till, what was it? I can't remember the specific year. It was like 82 or something like that. But and again, I don't want to give too many details, because I could talk about it. It was really cool the way that it built up, and the title Worth the Wait is definitely very fitting for what the program, what the teams plural had to do to get to where they were, and to get that first victory and just got the ball rolling for an incredible program that not just in Hoosier history, but just across the entire nation for the NCAA. So I definitely recommend going to watch that.
Yeah, it's been a fun day on BTN, by the way. I think
Yes.
there's been Indiana stuff all day today, and in fact, I know after we finish up recording this podcast, there are a couple of big football games coming up on BTN. So yeah, it's been fun on BTN, and totally recommend that documentary, like you guys were saying.
All right, we've got 2 more awards to give out, and again, it's a decades thing, so we could give out 20,000 awards. But our next award is going to be the best record for the 2010s decade, and that is going to go to Yogi Ferrell, who got the all-time assists record for the Indiana Hoosiers. And when you talk about any record, let alone a major statistic, and a current Hoosier breaking that, that means they've had to go through, and again, current college basketball players, most of them don't even make it 4 years, seniors. When back with the Bob Knight era, many of those players had 4 years to get all of these statistics, and basically when you've got points, the points record, all of these other major records, it's going to be extremely hard for someone to beat nowadays, which is the way basketball is, unless it obviously changes. So then you've got an assist record that's not just a statistic, an all-time statistic, but a major statistic. Because when you talk about double doubles or triple doubles, it's points and rebounds and assists. A major statistic, and then Yogi Ferrell getting that 633 mark, being that all-time Hoosier assists. I know Nithin's got a couple other records that we talked about. I think that's almost a no-brainer just because of what that specifically meant, not just for the record book, but along the way, all of the assists of what he did to help his specific teams win and do everything that they did.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. We were looking. There were some interesting records that were posted during the decade, and a lot of them just kind of for some reason didn't register in my memory until I looked them up. I totally agree. Yogi's assist record is the winner, especially given sort of the different roles he had to play at IU, from facilitator to sort of primary ball handler. Totally agree. But as far as some of these other records go, how about Robert Johnson knocking down 9 threes at Iowa in 2018? That tied an IU single game record. Juwan Morgan hit 16 baskets in a row over multiple games to set an IU basketball record there. Thomas Bryant shot 68% from the field in his sophomore season, which set a single season IU basketball record. And heck, that night where Yogi broke the assist record held by Michael Lewis, the Hoosiers knocked down 19 threes as a team in a 34-point win over Illinois, which was a school record.
Yep.
It was the school record as well. And that was a really fun basketball game to watch, to just kind of smash a Big Ten opponent like that, with so many records being set. So, and that's just on the surface. There are a few more records a little bit deeper if you dive. We talked about Juwan Morgan's triple double. A lot of interesting performances. But as far as which one wins the award for best record, no question, Yogi Ferrell taking the assist record.
All right, and our final award for this year, at least, the 2020 Archies, for talking about the 2010s decade for this men's basketball team, the Lifetime Achievement Award, aka the best senior, Matt, is who?
Well, the best senior award, Lifetime Achievement Award for the Archies, goes to Yogi Ferrell. Yogi Ferrell. I'm sure you guys were all expecting a different senior to win the award. No, I mean, I think it was the obvious choice. He's the 4-year player. If Victor Oladipo had stayed 3 years, if Cody Zeller had stayed 3 years, we might be talking about a different award winner here. But we were only lucky enough to have Vic for 3 years and have Cody for 2. And Yogi stayed all 4 years, was on 2 of the better Hoosier teams of the decade, if not the 2 best of the decade. Had 1,986 points, had 633 assists, had probably the best patented go-to move of offensive move of any IU basketball player this decade, in that transition pop and shoot 3-pointer that he used to always do, where he full sprint and then just plant both feet right for the 3-point line, and then in rhythm take a 3-pointer and hit it.
Beautiful.
It was beautiful to watch. I mean, when you got to think about the 2010s, you're going to have to think about a player. You're going to have to think about Yogi Ferrell. He was the best senior, the best player. Congratulations to Yogi Ferrell on winning the first Archies Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh man, I'm sure he's just thrilled with the honor. I'm like, yeah. Anyway, the thing though with Yogi is, on the surface you might think, hey, this is a pretty close race as far as best senior, right? We talked about Juwan Morgan, Robert Johnson definitely deserves recognition here. Will Sheehy, Christian Watford played a full 4 years, but when you really do look at kind of the numbers aspect of it, Yogi scored 500 more points than any other Hoosier this decade. I mean, fun fact: the second highest scorer for IU in this decade. Do you guys want to take a shot at it?
I already know.
You already know.
Yeah,
Matt,
I already looked it up.
You want to take a shot at it?
Robert Johnson.
You're right. It is Robert Johnson. Nicely done.
Let's go.
You get you're telling stories tonight and getting trivia questions right. Look at that. It's, double, triple threat. But it's at the end of the day an award that unquestionably should go to Yogi Ferrell. We talk, by far more assists than anyone else, nearly 300 more than Rob Johnson. Again, we talked about almost 600 points more than Robert Johnson. And ultimately, when you think of big shots, even that were made in the last decade, Watch Shot's number one, but Yogi's 3-pointer to beat Iowa on the road to win the Big Ten in 2016 was one that is one that's pretty deeply etched in my memory. So no question, lifetime achievement. Yogi Ferrell's got it. He's gone on, to hang around in the NBA. He's been in the NBA for a few years now. This time, right at the moment, he's with Sacramento. So great to see Yogi Ferrell, an Indianapolis kid, do great things at IU.
Now, Nithin, I assume you were talking about the second in this decade, the second player with the second highest amount of total points. You're excluding the 1 year that Christian Watford didn't have in this decade, because otherwise Christian would be second for if you add that extra. If you add that extra 2009, 2010 season. So let me see. If we were doing it, this is great podcasting, looking up on the spot. Is that season part of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? No, right before. Yeah. So if you count Christian Watford, he would have been technically second. Then Rojo, then Juwan Morgan. So if you look at all those are all guys that ended up being seniors because if you stay 4 years, it's a lot easier, obviously, to accumulate points. So definitely agree with lifetime achievement, best senior. Matt, do you have any closing thoughts of our first and hopefully not the only one of the Archies? Because then that means that Archie does well and continues to be the coach. But do you have any closing thoughts of our first ever Archies Award show?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, the Green Arrow was kind of fun, right? Like, you look back and think of some of these teams, it's like, well, 15,
after
16,
the fact, I think it's
after
fun.
the fact, after the
not
fact.
In some of those down seasons.
I think I'm pretty sure you can go back and look at some of the tapes. We were very vocal about wanting a different head coach at the beginning of this podcast. But looking back on it, there are some fun years. We really had some fun teams. They played a fun brand of basketball. So I want to thank Coach Crean for that. Yogi Ferrell was a joy to watch and an absolute treasure of a human being. And if you ever got to meet Yogi in and around campus, he was more than gracious to take a picture with you, say hi, give him a high five, whatever. It was awesome to be around him. Will Sheehy was fun to watch. Juwan Morgan was a great contributor. And looking back on it, if you think about the decade, 3 Sweet 16s, okay. 2 Big Ten titles, the win over Kentucky. We didn't make the tournament as much as we wanted to. There's a lot of things you can go over and go, man, that kind of sucked. But there was a lot of standout moments where it was also like, this was a lot of fun. And I think the one that has to top it off, obviously, is the win against Kentucky. That'll be something that I'll remember until I'm like 75 and have dementia and slowly losing it. But no, I seriously, that is obviously one of the best sports moments of the decade, one of the best sports moments that I can remember. I'm just so happy that it happened to the Hoosiers and in this decade.
Yeah, and for me, Matt, like you talked about some of the great players that played at Indiana. I mean, we didn't even mention, I don't think, guys like Jordan Hulls and Troy Williams, James Blackman Jr. And those guys made some pretty significant contributions to IU. Even Romeo Langford, who 1 year, but he
Thomas
hit some
Bryant
big shots.
More than the record you talked about.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, when it's all said and done, there were a lot of really impressive performances and Indiana Hoosier basketball careers that happened during the last 10 years. And hey, all that means is you could probably look forward to the same type of thing coming up over the next 10 years. So keep your eyes peeled, Hoosier Nation.
For sure. So hopefully you guys enjoyed our award show. If you want us to do something like this for like football or all of the other sports combined or something like that, let us know and we can get through this 2020 year of quarantine with each other. But that's going to wrap it up for our first segment of the Archies on the Hoosier Sound's 140th episode. Thank you to the audience for helping make these awards possible. If you want more from the host of the Hoosier Sound, make sure you subscribe to them so you can get news and updates on Twitter and click that subscribe button on YouTube. Lastly, if you enjoy this award show, this podcast, make sure you leave us a review, tell a friend, share a link so that we can reach as many passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
See you in a decade.